I'm talking about the Mitteler Rebbe. The Mitteler Rebbe's Yom Heledes and Yom Mistalkes Elul is this Shabbos, Tes Kislev. And Sunday, Yud Kislev is the Chag HaGeula, the Mitteler Rebbe. So as I often do, I started the story with the previous group. If anybody wants it, you'll ask me in an email. I'm Liadi, I'll send you the audio, the video. I send the audio. You want the video, you have to ask for it special, because the video takes up 2 or 3 gigs. It's a schlep to send, it's a schlep to receive, it's a schlep to download. If you want the video, I'll send it to you, but it doesn't make you want the audio. If you want me to send it, listen, a lot of girls have asked me for previous classes. I think I send it always. If I made a mistake and I forgot to send you something, ask me again. I try to be good about it. So I can send you the first part. I'm talking about the Mitteler Rebbe's life. The Alter Rebbe, if you could say this, was the only one of the Chabad Rebbes who truly had a pyramid. A pyramid like this. Where the Alter Rebbe was at the top. And under him there was a second layer and a third layer. The Mezitcher Maggid had a pyramid. The Mezitcher Maggid's whole Chassidus was a pyramid. But the Alter Rebbe had a pyramid. I don't think that later the Beis had a pyramid. And in Pashtus and Das Tachten, the reason they didn't have a pyramid is because they didn't have people to fill those roles. They didn't have people to sit in those positions. But the Alter Rebbe, Bechlal, had incredibly great Chassidim. Alter Rebbe's Chassidim were very, very great. Plus, he had many family members who were involved in Chassidus. Alter Rebbe had a brother, the MahaRiL. Alter Rebbe's number one chassid was his younger brother, the MahaRiL, Yehuda Leib. For those who do not know, the Alter Rebbe had 3 brothers. There were 4 boys, in other words. The Alter Rebbe was Shnei Zalman, he was the oldest. Then there was Yehuda Leib, then there was a Mordechai, then there was a Moshe. Mordechai and Moshe were very big Go'onim in Nigle, and they were very involved in the Alter Rebbe's teaching. But they were misnagdim. In other words, they didn't really embrace Derech HaChassidus. They were lomdim, they were Go'onim. The MahaRiL, the Yehuda Leib, was Alter Rebbe's Chassid, and he wrote Chassidus, the Sefer Torah Eid. It says in the beginning, Torah Eid, it's based on Anochas from the Alter Rebbe's brother, the MahaRiL. Yehuda Leib, MahaRiL. So the MahaRiL was a very good guy to have around. You have a brother who's a Goan and a Tzaddik and a Chassid. So the MahaRiL was put in charge of a certain age group of the Talmidim of the Alter Rebbe, and he was their Mashpia, which meant that if you wanted to go to Alter Rebbe to Yechidus, you'd go speak first to the MahaRiL. And the MahaRiL had to recommend you for a Yechidus. And then the Mitteler Rebbe was in charge of the younger light, of the younger men. Now this isn't Hayom Yom, but I just told you says in the Hayom Yom. But there's another name that's not mentioned in Hayom Yom, and I think I know why, although I think what I'm about to say is true, but I guess some people would say that it's wrong to add, but I'm not adding it on my own. Between the Elter Chassidim and the Mitteler Chassidim, the middle age, the middle group, the middle Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe were given to a young man whose name was Rabbi Aharon Alevi Horowitz, Rabbi Aharon Starshieler, who when the Alter Rebbe passed away, he became the Mitteler Rebbe's competition. He opened up another branch of Chabad, so that's why he's a controversial person. He was Gedei Talmidim of the Alter Rebbe, the Beis Rebbe. The Beis Rebbe is a very good sefer on the Alter Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, which are Rabbi respected and trusted, the Beis Rebbe. In the Beis Rebbe, each section has the Chassidim of each Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe's biography is brought, and Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, and same to the Mitteler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. By Rabbi Aharon Starshieler, it doesn't say HaChassid, it says HaTalmid, you know. Baal Shem Tov got Talmidim. The Mezitcher Maggid got Talmidim. Alter Rebbe got Talmidim, got Chassidim. What's the difference between a Talmud and a Chassid? A Talmud becomes a Rebbe, a Chassid becomes an old Chassid. Rabbi Aharon Alevi was in the Madrega of a Talmud in the Alter Rebbe. He was older than the Mitteler Rebbe by a few years. He came to the Alter Rebbe enlarged at the age of 14 years old. And already then he was a Elo, he was a Gon, and a Ovid, and a Kaddish, and alle gute Sachen. He went into the Alter Rebbe and he wrote a note. On the note he wrote, HaNefesh HaShveila B'yemes Eich Yiskarev Al Ein Seif. A truly lowly soul, how can he approach the Ein Seif? Now, Bechlal Yechidus is an incredible experience. But by the Alter Rebbe, Yechidus was hallowed. It was awesome. It was really, really intimidating. Alter Rebbe was wearing Big Day Shabbos. That means his Zeidness took with a Gattel and a Streimel. The Rabbi wore a Streimel, right? The only Rebbe didn't wear a Streimel was our Rebbe. Beginning with the Rebbe Rashab, the rule was a Streimel you wore only in Lubavitch. The Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch, he started wearing a Streimel. The Friedrich Rebbe left Lubavitch, he stopped wearing the shtreimel. The Friedrich Rebbe put the shtreimel back on by Alter Rebbe's Chassidim. The first Rishima, the first entry into the Alter Rebbe's Rishima, and the date is Hey Tevis, Chamisha B'Tevis, Tafish B'Tes. The Rebbe Rayatz called in his son-in-law, the Rebbe Zogazunzan, our Rebbe, and he told him that he had a dream. He saw his father, there's a lot of pratim, and one of the things his father told him is Adain Kfar and Hittel, which means thank you for putting on the shtreimel. The Friedrich put on a shtreimel to the Rebbe's Chassidim. That means the first 8 years he was a Rebbe, he wore only a hat. Because the Rebbe Rashab and the Rayatz were instructed, a shtreimel Trakman Nord in Lubavitch. And of course the Rebbe not only didn't wear a shtreimel, he didn't even wear a Hamburg, the Rebbe wore a fedora, Vesach, like a member of the Secret Service. The Rebbe was Rebbe. He didn't dress the part, but he was the part, you can't help it. Hittel Schmittel, you know, a Rebbe is a Rebbe. You put a shtreimel on a behemoth, he doesn't become a Rebbe. You put a hat on a Rebbe, he's a Rebbe. You want to ask questions about the hat? Yeah, there's a reason. But I was talking about with the Rebbe recently. He says, the girl is going to ask you, don't tell her. What do you think? What do we know? The Rebbe does what he has to do, and that's the end of the story. Kartik, that's all. The reason is because the Rebbe did it. That's the reason. He's talking about the Sibbe. Anyway, so Aharon Ashela, so the Yechidus Alter Rebbe was mamish oyim, and he had 2 candles on the table. On the table, I heard from people that the Rebbe used to put candles on the floor by nights of Yechidus behind him. But the Alter Rebbe had him on the table, and the candles used to reflect off the Alter Rebbe's face with the shtreimel to create shadow, and it was mamish intimidating. It was an awesome experience. And we know stories. A Chassid walked into the Alter Rebbe, he picked up a candle, and he shone it in the Chassid's face to read the fine print. Alter Rebbe, but it must feel like you're standing in front of the Alter Rebbe, he takes a candle and he shines it in your face to see if it was puked for tutzach. It was awesome. Rabbi was 14 years old. He was a Godel B'Yisrael, he was a Godel Shebegdel, but he was 14. And he walked to the Alter Rebbe to Yechidus. He was an Eloi. He was a prodigy with a great mind and a great heart and a great soul. And he'd served Hashem his whole life. But he was a boy. He walks into Yechidus and he gives the Alter Rebbe his middle note, a few words. HaNefesh HaShvela be'emes heiches karav ha'ein seil, a truly lowly soul, how can it approach the Yein Seif? Alter Rebbe got so excited. He walked out of the room and left the poor guy standing there. I can just imagine the tears. He walked out holding the paper in his hand. And outside the Alter Rebbe's room there was a small Beis Medrash. Right outside the door, called Gan Eden HaTachten. Alter Rebbe's ched is called Gan Eden HaElyon. The room next door is called Gan Eden HaTachten. And in the Gan Eden HaTachten, the greatest Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe used to sit and learn. It's called the Talmidim from Cheder Aleph, the highest Madrege. Alter Rebbe walks out, you understand him, somebody all stood up. He's holding the paper, and he says to them, Ottes gekommen a Jingel, und gefragt a Frage, was keinem von euch hat nicht angefangen zu fragen. Here, a boy came, and he asked me a question none of you even thought to ask. So Aharon Starshieler became very, very attached to Alter Rebbe, incredibly attached. Mamish, like a son. Alter Rebbe said about him later, he's like an eye, an apple of my eye. Aharon HaLevi. He became #1 Talmud, you know. Alter Rebbe said Chassidus, Aharon used to collect it, and he used to chazir it, and but you have to understand, Chassidus Bechlal, and Chassidus in those days, Befrat, what was it about? It was about avodah, it was about serving Hashem. It was about connecting to God. And the Talmidim, the Chassidim, the Mukusharim, were taught by their Rebbe how to connect to Hashem. That's what it was about. It was a very serious and mature affair. And Aharon HaLevi was the greatest Alter Rebbe's Talmidim. There's not even a question. Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, and Alter Rebbe taught him Chassidus, and taught him Avodah, and Alter Rebbe, he was very makusha, he was very attached to Alter Rebbe in as much as Alter Rebbe taught him. The Aharon HaLevi was older than the Mitteler Rebbe. I don't know by how many years, but it wasn't a year or two. It may have been eight years. So when he came, he was 14, the Mitteler was 6, or something like that, or maybe 6 years. There was a lot of years between them. I don't know at what point, but they became incredibly close friends. And they would learn together, and they would daven together. They understood each other. They were incredibly great minds. And they were also unbelievably great neshamas. And they were both, the Mitteler Rebbe and Aharon, Oivdei Elokim, they served the Eibishter, and they became pashat attached. And their attachment was Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe. And the story was that the two of them were walking outside someplace, and they were physically holding hands. They were good friends, holding hands. So one of the Chassidim said to the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe was there, and he pointed to the two of them, and he said to the Alter Rebbe, today and the Lo Mispash. Two friends that never part. According to Kabbalah, today and the Lo Mispash is Chochmah and Bina. They're always they're always together. So he said to the Alter Rebbe about the Mitteler Rebbe, about Halevi, today and the Lo Mispash. And the Alter Rebbe sighed at the Krechzitan, and he said, Halavai the Lo Mispash. I wish that was true. Later, there was a big machlokes between the Mitteler Rebbe and the Starshieler. He became his competition. They both opened up shops, and Aharon had a lot of Chassidim. Was a very big, a magnetic personality. And there's different stories about why the split between them happened. The nekuda of it is that the Mitteler Rebbe was greater than him. Mitteler Rebbe was much higher madrega, and it played out in the Alter Rebbe's relationship with them. Alter Rebbe didn't treat them equal. And Aharon felt it, and it hurt him. And there's a lot of pratim. I'm going to get back to this a little bit later on. I'll tell you those little stories as much as we know from the Rebbe's and Rishimis. But they became separate. The end was that Aharon left Liadi, and he didn't come back anymore because Alter Rebbe was merachek him. So the Alter Rebbe said when he left, they pulled an eye out of my head. It hurt the Alter Rebbe very deeply. But when they were young, they were very close friends. And the way I understand it was the MahaRiL was in charge of the older Chassidim, Rabbi Aharon was in charge of the middle Chassidim, and the Mitteler Rebbe, who was younger, was in charge of the younger Chassidim. And each one of these was their mashpia and their madrich. You have to imagine what that must have looked like. Every chassid had his mashpia, and a mashpia in those days was a serious thing. You didn't go to him and say, "Do I have a heter to go to college?" Rahman al-Islam. It was teach me how to serve the Eibishter. Yeah? The goal of each chassid was to be zeicha to a yechidus. But zeicha to a yechidus meant that your mashpia was giving you hadracha, would say, I don't know the answer to your question, go ask my mashpia. And there was a pyramid. So you had your mashpia. Above your mashpia was the head mashpiyim, and above the head mashpiyim was the Rebbe. You couldn't get into the Alter Rebbe until you went through, it was like the HMOs today. You had to go through the gatekeepers. Because the Alter Rebbe wasn't having yechidus to make people feel good. It was avodas Hashem. If you had an issue on avodas Hashem and the mashpia could help you, you didn't need the Rebbe, you didn't go into the Rebbe. But if you came to your mashpia and you had a question on any avodah, the mashpia couldn't help you, he would send you to his mashpia. It was like a pyramid. At the head of the pyramid was the Alter Rebbe himself, and if none of them could help you, that's when you would go into the Alter Rebbe to Yechidus. So the story, as I mentioned to you before, was that the Mitteler Rebbe was not a very healthy person. He was sick a lot. He was a sickly person from childhood. He was sick more than once or twice. And when he would get sick, he couldn't do his function. He couldn't act as the mashpia for the younger light. To talk about the Mitteler Rebbe's illnesses, there's two stories that I'll share with you, which you know. One of them you know for sure. The other one is not so well known, although the Rebbe repeated the story by a Fabrengen. The Alter Rebbe was about the Alter Rebbe was about Torah. He used to read the Torah himself. And the Mitteler Rebbe heard his father's kriya. Alter Rebbe's kriya. The B'nitz B'rav said about it, but Alter Rebbe lays the Torah, Eres kulei lamayla, un los nishois kin ein tag lamata. He's completely up there, and down here the trop and the diktuk is perfect. Alter Rebbe's kriya. This grad da maise from today's chitas, when Alter Rebbe's laning. Today's Monday, Pachas Vayetze. That Yaakov Avinu comes to Aharon, he comes to the well, and he meets the shepherds. And he says to them, Hayadaitem is Lavan ben Nachir. Do you know Lavan, the son of Nachir? Vayemru Yodanu, and the shepherd said, we know him. So Alter Rebbe was laying the Torah, and he read the words, Hayadaitem is Lavan ben Nachir, and he fell to the ground. In Dvekis, it's gekaikult. Alter Rebbe went into a trance. He stood up, and he read, Vayemru Yodanu, he finished the pasuk. And that day, the Alter Rebbe said, Amay Mechsidis, Haydaitim is Lavan ben Nachir. We don't have that maimed, at least as far as I know. But as I can see them, he said a maimed, Haydaitim Lavan ben Nachir, in the middle of laning. So something happened, and he rolled on the floor. He got up, and he finished the pasuk. And later that day, he said a maimed chassidus on this pasuk, Haydaitim Lavan ben Nachir. So the Alter Rebbe used to lane, and one time he wasn't around, and somebody else read Pachas Kisavi. And Pachas Kisavi is the teichachet, the curses, the klolos. And the Mitteler Rebbe got sick. He got so sick that Yom Kippur, which is 3 weeks later, the Alter Rebbe was not sure of Allah is allowed to fast. So you all know the story that they came to the Mitteler Rebbe and said, you hear this every year. Why all of a sudden did you chalish? You get sick? So the Mitteler Rebbe said that the Tata leint hetzich nishkin close. My father reads, I don't hear any curses. And the Rebbe once spoke about it by Fabrengen with a lot of his lectures. At the Tata leint hetzich, my father reads, I don't hear close. Just to finish on that note, when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, Alter Rebbe passed away, Chavdal Tevis. A month, 2 years later, was Purim. So they put up a Balkeira, and when he finished reading the Megillah, the Mitteler Rebbe went over to him and said that was an amazing story. That was such a beautiful story. I never heard such a story before. He was 40 years old. He says, Rebbe, what, you hear it every year? He says, no, when my father read the Megillah, I didn't hear it. That story I never heard. The story you just told, I never heard. It was a very interesting story, but I never heard it. The Tata Geleit, that he had that Nanshanananda Maisen. So the other story about Mitteler Rebbe's health is that the Mitteler Rebbe had a cholim. It's a famous story. The Rebbe said, you have it in the Ma'aser Av. The Rebbe told the story in great detail. He had a dream. And in his dream, he sees 3 men. One was tall with a red beard. One was on the right, was short and stocky with a very swollen leg, could barely walk. And on the left was the Alter Rebbe, his father. And the 3 of them walked up to the river, and there was no bridge. What there was a log, a tree that ran across, and the string. You know, you walk onto the log, you held onto the string, and you walked across. In the olden days, that's how they made bridges. They come to the water, and the man in the middle says to the man on the right with the swollen leg, the short, stocky man with the swollen leg, they should walk across. So he climbs up onto the log, he grabs the string, and he starts walking, and immediately the water starts to churn. The water starts to churn. Instead of washing over the bridge. In other words, the water started to go over the log. And this person was holding on to the string, and he almost fell in. I got to the other side. Then this man in the middle told his father, the Alter Rebbe, to climb up on the log and also walk across. As soon as Alter Rebbe went on the log, the water became very quiet. And Alter Rebbe walked across with no problems. The Mitteler Rebbe saw this dream, and I don't know exactly why, but he fasted a Tainus Chalev. He fasted a fast for having a bad dream. Because somehow the Mitteler Rebbe decided that was a terrible dream. The Alter Rebbe heard that the Mitteler Rebbe fasted, and the Alter Rebbe was very makbid. The Alter Rebbe didn't let him fast because he was such an ill person. And he heard the Mitteler Rebbe took on an extra fast in addition to the regular fasts. So he called him in at the Moizgim Mussat. He reprimanded him. How you talking? You took upon yourself a fast without asking permission from me. So the Mitteler Rebbe said, I had a bad dream. Alter Rebbe says, what was the dream? So he repeated the whole dream. And the Alter Rebbe's response was, Nish gefährlich. It wasn't such a bad dream. You know, it didn't have to. It wasn't Nish gefährlich. It was a terrible dream. So the Mitteler Rebbe asked him, what is the meaning of the dream? So Alter Rebbe told him, the man in the middle was the Baal Shem Tov, and the man on the right, who the Alter Rebbe used to call the Zayde, and the man on the right was the Mitteler Maggid, who the Mitteler Rebbe was named after, who the Alter Rebbe used to call the Rebbe. So then the Mitteler Rebbe said to his father, Father, why when the Rebbe walked across the bridge, the water started washing over the bridge and almost threw him, pushed it into the water? And the Dubas Yangan of a brick, when you walked onto this tree, it was very calm. So the Alter Rebbe said, Wie gleichst du mir zum Rebbe? How could you compare me to my Rebbe? Ich hab doch gemacht bei Tshuva. The Rebbe hat sich nicht ausgewählt bei Tshuva. You can't compare me to my Rebbe. I made by Tshuva. In other words, the Alter Rebbe said, my security is not from the greatest Chassidim from Gelent and Gedavant. My security is that I made by Tshuva. And the Rebbe did not make by Tshuva. The Mitteler Rebbe was involved only in Tzadikim. And involved with Tzadikim, Gemurim was a sakona, you understand? Alter Rebbe gemacht by Tshuva, which is why if you look at the tzion of the Rabbeim, you go to the oil, the Rebbe's tombstones have fewer words than most of the big Chassidim around the oil. But one of the few things it says by each one of the Rabbeim is V'Rabim Heishiv Meyavin, that the Rabbeim are gemacht by Tshuva. The Rabbeim consider this such a big thing. In other words, there's Greisach Chassidim, was lernen und davenen von dem sich unter den Pnimiyim. And then there's Pasha taking a person off the street and teaching him Shabbos and kosher and mikveh and film. A Pasha read. By the Rabbeim, making Bali Tshuva was the biggest thing. And this is a story that supports it. Anyway, the Mitteler Rebbe was sick a lot. He was sick a lot. I told the other girls once he needed a mimer. He needed a mimer. I didn't say a mimer, he got sick for that also. So when the Mitteler Rebbe was ill, the Alter Rebbe asked Rabbi Aharon Starshieler to do double duty. Rabbi Starshieler was in start of the Mitteler Jungelite, the middle-aged Chassidim. The MahaRiL was in charge of the older Chassidim. The Mitteler was in charge of the younger ones. The Mitteler Rebbe was not well. He wasn't able to be involved with the Mahadrocha of his Jungelite, of his people. So the Alter Rebbe asked Rabbi Starshieler that he should do both, his job and the Mitteler Rebbe's job. And he agreed. Rabbi Starshieler was a big Baal Madrege. He was a Gorag He was a big tzaddik. He was a person like Reis tzaddik. And after he took on the Mitteler Rebbe's Jungelite, he felt that his own personal avodah was dragging. Rabbi Starshieler, Zayin avodah, it wasn't going. It was schlepping. And it bothered him. And it bothered him so much, he felt like he's dragging his feet. He actually went into Alter Rebbe Yechidus. And he told the Alter Rebbe, I don't know why, but it's all of a sudden my avodah is like heavy, like I have no koyach. So the Alter Rebbe told him, wie bald als du führst sich mit der Jungeleit mit Gvuris, führt man sich mit dir mal Meile mit Gvuris. The Rabbi Starshieler was a very strict Rebbe. He was a very strict man, a very Gvuridik person. The Mitteler Rebbe was also strict, but upon him not as strict. And when the Rabbi Starshieler took over the Jungelite, he started to criticize them a lot. The Mitteler Rebbe was more encouraging upon him. Now the Rebbe said to him, because you're treating the Jungelite with more Gvura, you're being treated Momaila with more Gavur. In other words, you have to be kind even to the people that you're trying to teach Darki HaAvodah, Darki HaChassidus, which of course, it requires criticism. But the Alter Rebbe said you're being very critical of the Talmidim, and the Eibusha, so to speak, is being critical of you, and that's how it's playing out in your life. Now, the story is this. The Alter Rebbe, what a man, what a life. There was nothing easy about the Alter Rebbe's life, nothing. But it was incredibly accomplished. It was incredibly a successful life. One component of the Alter Rebbe's incredibly successful life was the Maimonim, the Chassidus. You know, that says in Hayem Yem that his Maimonim changed 4 times over the course of his life. If you know about Hayem Yem Bahart, in the beginning it was Verter, and then it was Igres, and then it was Drushim, and then it was Maimonim. I forgot the 4 labels, but over the course of the Alter Rebbe's life, his Maimonim evolved. In the beginning, a Maimon was 2-3 lines. Mamish, 2-3 lines. Chassidim Lavezeh, was like fire. And believe it or not, we have a lot of those Maimonim. Those teeny tiny Maimonim, those 3-liners, there's a whole volume. It's a book called Maimori Admor Azokan HaKtzorim. It's one volume, has over 800 Maimonim in it. How do you put 800 Maimonim in a book? Very simple. 3 Maimonim per page. You used to a Maimon being 4 pages, 5 pages, 6 pages. Here's a Maimon, 3 lines, 2 lines, 4 lines, a line and a half. The Chassidim had it. It's in the Bichlach. The Rebbe had it with him. And the Rebbe printed a volume. You literally have in one book like 800 Maimonim. I once counted. Because you have Maimonim a half a page, a third of a page, a quarter of a page, very, very short. But over time, the Maimonim became longer and they changed. The Alter Rebbe had different kufas. There's before Liadi, there's after Liadi, there's the early years in Lozha, the late years in Lozha. The Alter Rebbe developed Chabad slowly.
Was it set all the same way? Like the short ones and the longer ones? Like how do people know that?
The Alter Rebbe spoke always with a tune. The Alter Rebbe Chassidim, any word that came out of his mouth was a maimed. If you told the story, it was also a maimed. And they wrote it like that. The Alter Rebbe spoke everything with a niggin. Alter Rebbe, everything he said was a niggin. Rabbi said a maimed with a niggin. Alter Rebbe told you good morning was a niggin. Everything with Alter Rebbe was that same niggin. The Rabbi said Chassidus, from what I understand. Anyway, but Alter Rebbe had rules. You were not allowed to repeat his words or copy his words down unless you wrote them verbatim, word for word. It was called being medayik and eisias harav, being medaktik and eisias harav. And Alter Rebbe was very strict. Alter Rebbe was very strict. So the Alter Rebbe said a maimed, and the Chassidim would review it, and they had to review it verbatim, word for word. Word for word. To be maniach, to write, to transcribe a maimed, you had to know how to rewrite a maimed, which Alter Rebbe said in Yiddish, verbatim in Hebrew. If you look at Chassidus, look at Chassidus. Chassidus grammar is terrible. The Hebrew grammar, MahaRiL Chassidus, is absolutely terrible. How to teach it? Atrocious. It's absolutely terrible. And there's a simple reason why. Because Chassidus does not have Hebrew grammar. It has Yiddish grammar in Hebrew. In Yiddish, there's a lot of double negatives, right? You don't say there isn't, you say there isn't yes, nicht faran, right? Right? How do you translate norvaden in Yiddish, in Hebrew? In Hebrew it's Ella, right? In Yiddish you don't say nor, you say norvaden. So in the Maimon it's Elarak. That's not Hebrew. That's gibberish. The MahaRiL Chassidus are written still. When they wrote Hanochas of Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, they had to write them in Hebraic-sized Yiddish. There was a younger man that can't good the Kabbalah. He decided he's going to write a Maimon in Hebrew. So he wrote the Maimon in Hebrew, took out all the double negatives, and the Rebbe wrote on the margin, Haloshan Muzar Miyoid. It was actually correct grammar. There's something very strange about this Maimon. It's no good. Because the Alter Rebbe spoke in Yiddish, and they wrote every word. Right, das haste. Right, how's das haste? Hebrew, das haste. Hainu, shenikra, whatever, every day, grammar's terrible. But the Alter Rebbe wanted word for word. Now the Alter Rebbe approved certain manichim, so Chassidim were not allowed to write. Because you had to write word for word. The Alter Rebbe approved 5 manichim, 5 people to write as Maimorim. The first was his brother. Then 2 of his sons, the Mitteler Rebbe and the Moshe, his youngest son, and his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek. And the 5th was a Chassid by the name of the Pinchas Roizis. You may have heard his name, the Pinchas Shklov. The Pinchas, his family name was Shik. He was a very big Chassid, and he used to stand next to Alter Rebbe during Chassidus. And when Alter Rebbe would roll on the floor, he would roll with him. And he would hear every word, and he wrote Hanochas. If you have the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe, there's a volume called Maimori Admor Hazak and Hanochas Harab, Hey Reish Pei. That's the Pinchas Roizis. And the Maimorim are printed as a separate volume. He was very precise. But the Mitteler Rebbe had different rules. When the Alter Rebbe said a Maimer, the Mitteler Rebbe wrote the Maimer with his commentary. What does that mean? The Alter Rebbe's Maimorim could be short. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes. At the end of the Alter Rebbe's life, a Maimer could be half an hour, 40 minutes. But the Mitteler Rebbe wrote it with his commentary. So let's say it's 5 minutes a page. Let's say 5 minutes a page. Alter Rebbe said a Maimer for 20 minutes. That's 4 pages. 40 minutes is 8 pages, 9 pages. And the Mitteler Rebbe had 20 pages. Why? Because he wrote the Maimer with his commentary, with his beer, together. And the Alter Rebbe was like a tzadkin with him. The Mitteler Rebbe could do no wrong. Whatever was perfect. Alter Rebbe was so proud and he loved it. The Mitteler Rebbe had the reshus to chazer and to write Chassidus the Alter Rebbe with his beer. During the Alter Rebbe's lifetime, Chassidim came to the Mitteler Rebbe to chazer with the Alter Rebbe because they knew that he wasn't just going to repeat Alter Rebbe's words, he was going to explain it. The Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidus is like a mashpia talking. And he gave himself a stein. And the Chassidim loved it. Rabbi Aaron Starshieler was older than the Mitteler Rebbe. Rabbi Aaron Starshieler was an Adam Gadol. He was a God. So he did the same thing. He used to say the Maimorim with his own beer, and he wrote them with his own beer, and the Alter Rebbe called him in and said, you have to stop. Lashon Rav. Now, I don't know if Rabbi Starshieler actually said to the Alter Rebbe, excuse me, what about your son? But that's how he felt. He felt that the Mitteler Rebbe can do whatever he wants, and I can't. And of course, the real teretz is, because the Mitteler Rebbe was not the same person as the Rabbi Starshieler. Rabbi Starshieler was, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in a Sikha, Harav HaGon, Harav HaKodesh, Harav HaTzadik, aber nicht Rebbe. About the Rabbi, he was a Gon and a Kodesh and a Tzaddik, but he wasn't a Rebbe. The Mitteler Rebbe was a Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe had implicit trust. In the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimorim, it's so interesting. Alter Rebbe was so proud of the Mitteler Rebbe. The Mitteler Rebbe could do no wrong. He was such a great Tzaddik, and such a great Ovid, and such a great Gon, that whatever the Mitteler Rebbe did, the Alter Rebbe was happy with. It was extraordinary. The relationship that the Alter and Mitteler Rebbe had, we don't know of any other father-son relationship in our culture, in Chabad, where there was this kind of connection that was over, it was shameless. Alter Rebbe Poshet was proud of the Mitteler Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the Kutei Deburim, in the Sichos, that the Alter Rebbe wanted, if we medactic in Lashon Harav, he wrote the Alter Rebbe's words exactly, and the Mitteler Rebbe used to write to Maimorim in the Alter Rebbe's lifetime, forget about afterward, in Alter Rebbe's lifetime. He wrote Maimorim with Biur, so the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, Men kenselin the Asias Haravi Peril. You can count the original words of Alter Rebbe like you count pearls, meaning the Mitteler Rebbe actually did what his father told him. He kept every word of his father's intact. He didn't touch the original word, he just wrote around it. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, if you know how to read a maimer of the Mitteler Rebbe, can mensail the Asias Harav, you can count the words, the original words of Alter Rebbe in this long, elaborated commentary. You can count in the Mitteler Rebbe, the Asias Haravi Peril. You should know that later on, there was a machlokes between the Mitteler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. No, they didn't fight with one another. They didn't become 2 different teams, but they had a disagreement. Tzemach Tzedek's life, one of the greatest things of Tzemach Tzedek's life, was preserving Alter Rebbe's Chassidus. So Mitteler devoted 32,000 hours, 32,000 hours, 32,000 hours. How much time that is? 32,000 hours. Collecting Orad Alter Rebbe, collecting them, editing them Alter Rebbe, and then annotating them, right? Ha'aras and Marmakemis. He did it. One of the biggest accomplishments of Mitteler's life was he preserved the Marmad Alter Rebbe. But the Tzemach Tzedek felt that when you write your own notes, Chassidim have to know what's yours and what's the Alter Rebbe. So Tzemach Tzedek used to make parentheses. Marmad Alter Rebbe, parenthesis. In addition, Tzemach Tzedek, when he would write his notes, wrote them only in shorthand, cryptic notes, just a few Marmakemis, a word here, a word there, because he didn't want Chassidim to confuse what's the Alter Rebbe's and what's his. Because in this Zihirus of the Alter Rebbe, it's a hit neisias harav. The Mitteler Rebbe used to write long Megillas, and he didn't tell you which is his and which is Alter Rebbe's. You had to figure it out. So Tzemach Tzedek and the Mitteler Rebbe had this machlokes that Tzemach Tzedek said to his shver, his uncle, his father-in-law, his predecessor, that when you take a mime of the Alter Rebbe and you make your own commentary, people have to know what's yours and what's the Alter Rebbe's. The Mitteler Rebbe didn't do that. He made it into one inyan. Tzemach Tzedek, when he did, sometimes I'm not a big maven of this. I once saw the Mitteler Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek both wrote commentaries on the same Ma'amad Alter Rebbe, and they write the same notes, same inyanim. But the Mitteler Rebbe writes it out in 2-3 pages. Tzemach Tzedek writes it in 3 lines. Mitteler Rebbe explains it. Tzemach Tzedek just makes a few little code, and you have to figure it out yourself, because the Tzemach Tzedek wanted that we should know what is ACS Harav. So Rabbi Anas Hashel was very upset. So he didn't listen. He continued to do what he was doing before. That was, he would say to my mother with beer, he would write my beer. And Alter Rebbe called him in several times, and he told him that he has to stop. And again, I don't know whether he told Alter Rebbe straight, but his thinking was, how am I different than the Mitteler Rebbe? I'm older than him. I was older than him. So at one point, Alter Rebbe said, if he doesn't stop, he's going to punish him. At Kansanen. What was the punishment? The punishment was that Alter Rebbe said, for 2 years you can't come to Liadi. This was in the later years. For 2 years, not to come to the Rebbe. For a chassid like that, not to come there for 2 years was like ripping his life away. So for 2 years he didn't come, and then he came again. And it started over, the same parsha. That he would not say the Eisias Harav, and he would add biur, he would write with Hanochas with the biur. And Alter Rebbe again called him in and says, you have to stop. And he didn't listen. Alter Rebbe sent him away again. Same einish, 2 years he can't come to Alter Rebbe. And after the second time, he never came back. He never came back to Alter Rebbe. And that's when the Alter Rebbe said, they ripped an eye out of my head. It hurt Alter Rebbe very deeply that the Aharon left. So just to finish the Lashon Hara, since I'm saying all the politics, Chassidim Chabad have a very interesting relationship with Aharon. He has fun. It's Chassidus in the middle from Starshieler, which Kahas never printed. The Rebbe said once by the Sudas upstairs, as ich wollte gehabt Chassidim Bari Samche, wollte ich gedruckt the Starshieler Chassidus, the famous story that you heard, Mustama, the joke. That somebody came down from upstairs and said that the Rebbe said he's going to print the Chassidus from Mr. Shelach. Mr. Shelach was Neach's grandfather, in case you don't know. He died a few days before the Mabel started. The Rebbe said Starshieler, and he heard Mr. Shelach. The Rebbe said, if I had Chassidim Bari Samach, if I had Chassidim that I could trust, I would print the Chassidus of the Starshieler. So Chassidim didn't know what to do. The Chassidus is very good. And it's the Alter Rebbe's my mother. The Starshieler took the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus, it wasn't his own. So people had a love-hate relationship with us. Yet to learn, not to learn. Anyway, a Yid walked into the Frierdiker Rebbe's Beis Medrash, either in Riga or in Varsha, in Tvatsk. And the Rebbe, Zolgazund, and our Rebbe was sitting, and he was learning the Sefer from the Starshieler in Shul. Rahman al-San, people could see that he's not loyal, he's not a member of the team, he's being politically incorrect. And he walked up to the Rebbe, our Rebbe, and he said to him, there's situations with this guy, So the Rebbe didn't respond to it. He just told him, "Das is sehr tief and safe. It's a very deep safe." In other words, the Rebbe wasn't going to the old machlokes. It's as far as the Rebbe is concerned, it's in the past. And the Rebbe just said to him, "Says sehr tief and safe." He was an Adam godless Starshieler, but the Mitteler Rebbe was different. Mitteler was different. One of the stories which is brought in the Rebbe is the Shemis. It's a painful story. It's hard a little bit to understand the story, but the story was that there was a fire. There was a fire, and they had to save themselves from this big conflagration. I'm not sure exactly how it was, but you had to run and hide. And there were a bunch of people, and they ran, and by mistake, they ran into a church, to hide in a church. Now, to give you a mice, another side of the story, the Rebbe Rashab had a chassid whose name was Reb Mendel Chaim. Menachem Mendel Chaim, he was the Rav in Nezhin. The Nezhin Rav. There's a tzin, there's a matzeva. I was in Nezhin. He's buried near the Mitteler Rebbe. Mitteler was buried in Nezhin also. And in 1919 there was pogroms. He was 39 years old. And they were running through the streets killing Yidden. The Galach, the Goy, the Galach went to the pogromers, to the Rotzchim, and said, "You can't stop killing the Jews." And they didn't listen to him. So he ran to the Mendel Chaim and says, "Come into the church. They will not touch you in the church." He begged the Mendel Chaim. He was a Goy, he was a Galach, but he had respect for the Mendel Chaim. The Mendel Chaim was a Goy Olam. Come into the church. And the Mendel Chaim refused. And they murdered him. They killed him al Kiddush Hashem. The Mendel Chaim. This is the Rebbe Rashab's chassid. Here's one of the Alter Rebbe's, Tomim. The magic word is Tomim. That's the magic word. Tomim. The Banas Starshieler, one of the greatest of Alter Rebbe, was a Makom Sakona, and he ran into the church. But when the Mitteler Rebbe heard about it, he started laughing. He started to laugh. Now, it doesn't say the meaning of the laugh. It just says that he laughed. And this really was upsetting to him. But the way I understand it, that this is me talking, this isn't the Rebbe's journal, which was printed. It probably should not have been printed. But here I am, not only did I read it, but I'm repeating it to you. So the whole Chas v'Shalom, if someone didn't read it in the yeshivas, they'll get it from me. My interpretation is that the Mitteler Rebbe laughed because the Mitteler Rebbe was saying to Banas Starshieler, "You're always comparing yourself to me. But are we the same?" That's how I understand the laugh. But the Mitteler Rebbe was saying to us, "You mamish, you ran into a church." So in other words, the Banas Starshieler felt the whole time that he's equal to the Mitteler Rebbe. And when the Mitteler Rebbe was laughing, his message to his friend was, "We're not the same. I'm the Alter Rebbe's son, and you're not the Alter Rebbe's son." But the Starshieler was very hurt. He didn't agree, he didn't accept it. So the Alter Rebbe passed away, he became a Rebbe, and he took a lot of the Chassidim. Some of the biggest Chassidim, the Alter Rebbe went to the Starshieler. It was mamish a real competition. It was a zera, shvera, matzev. The Mitteler Rebbe wasn't happy about it. Now, just to finish the Hemshech HaSipur, the Alter Rebbe's relationship to the Mitteler Rebbe, it's so unusual. The Alter Rebbe was pushed so proud of the Mitteler Rebbe. L'mashal, there was a bavus zach, was a standing argument. The Alter Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe would argue a lot. What do they argue about? The Alter Rebbe used to say to his son, the Mitteler Rebbe, "Ich bin größer für dir." Alter Rebbe said to the Mitteler Rebbe, "I'm greater than you. Because I have a son who's a Rebbe." And the Mitteler Rebbe said to Alter Rebbe, "Ich bin größer für dir. Weil ich habe Tata Rebbe." And said, "I'm greater because my father was a Rebbe." This was the kind of argument that they had. Yeah. So the end was that the last years of Alter Rebbe's life, Alter Rebbe lived in Liadi. And Liadi was the best years. The last year of Alter Rebbe's life, if not for Napoleon, the best years of Alter Rebbe's life was Liadi. The Misnagdim were no longer bothering him, and the Pelish Chassidim also were leaving him alone. And the true fanem of Chabad was being radiated. Alter Rebbe was saying Chassidus unbelievably. And the Mitteler Rebbe was there. And the Mitteler Rebbe used to say Hanochas and Chazir Chassidus and the whole thing. So if you came to the Alter Rebbe, and you had a question in Yonim Gashmim, a physical question about Parnasa, health, and so on and so forth, he would help you. If you came to the Alter Rebbe with a shaila in Yoni Avoida, about Ruchnius, the Alter Rebbe used to say, "Geh zu mein Rebbe." Go to my Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe said, "Geh zu mein Rebbe," he meant his son. You understand? Go to my Rebbe, he meant the Mitteler Rebbe. You go to the Mitteler Rebbe, and the Mitteler Rebbe would help you in Yoni Avoida, Pnimius, Chabad. When the Mitteler Rebbe became a Rebbe, this same tradition continued, but a little bit different. The Mitteler Rebbe was a mufshit. He was not in this world, b'chal. If you came to the Mitteler Rebbe Avoida, he gave you eitzes and adrach and avodas Hashem. If you came from Yonim Gashmim, the Mitteler Rebbe couldn't go down that low. He would send you to his brother. The Mitteler Rebbe had two brothers. The second brother was Chaim Avraham. Chaim Avraham lived in Lubavitch. He was by the Mitteler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. He passed away to the Tzemach Tzedek in the seas. Chaim Avraham was Meirach Yomim. The Frierdiker Rebbe says he looked like the Alter Rebbe. He was tall with a big forehead, with fiery eyes. And he was a shoisek, he never spoke. He was a tzaddik, he was a gon and a kaddish. Alter Rebbe's son. But he was not the Rebbe, so he was like a part of the furniture, you understand? He was always there, in Lubavitch. So he came to Chaim Avraham, he said, "I have a problem with health, I have a problem with parnasa." And Chaim Avram would say, why are you coming to me? I've gained some brothers. Go my brother, the Rebbe. So you say to Chaim Avram, the brother had geschickt. Your brother sent me to you. And then Chaim Avram would say, the brother had geschickt. He'd put on his streimel and he would help you. In other words, you had to say, if you came to him and asked him an age, he said, why are you coming to me? Go to the Rebbe. But if you said, and it was the truth, of course, the brother had geschickt, so now he was doing work for his brother, so then it was okay. And in Yonim Gashmi, by the Mitteler Rebbe, he didn't take care of himself. He sent you to his brother. But by the Mountain Rebbe, by the Alter Rebbe, the Seder was that if you came in the later years, if you came from Yonim Gashmi, he helped you himself. When he came to Yonim Ruchnim, he would send you, he was a gates of mine Rebbe. He would send you to the Mitteler Rebbe. You understand? That's the kind of a person the Mitteler Rebbe was. The Yachas with the Alter Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe was really, really, really extraordinary. Now, what else is there to tell you? This is so hard to understand. The Mitteler Rebbe was such a genius that Mevinim said that he was a bigger genius than the Alter Rebbe. He was a moidenik cup. He never understood the value of money. It just didn't make sense to him. Money did not make sense to him. The Bali Agola, the coachman of Lubavitch, knew that if you took the Mitteler Rebbe, you asked him to pay. So he put his money in his pocket and he gave you money. He can give you a single ruble note, a 5 ruble note, a 10 ruble note, a 50 ruble note, a 100 ruble note. He never asked you for change. It was all the same, it was paper. It's a nicht geklippen. And the Chevra, the Balagola made a killing, you understand? You take him across town, he gives you 100 ruble. Because he gave you a piece of paper, it's nicht geklippen. The Tzemach Tzedek became a Rebbe. So the first time he gets into the Balagola, so the Tzemach Tzedek gives him 100 ruble, and the guy says thank you, and they say, excuse me, sir, change. The trip cost 3 ruble, not 100. So the Balagos were running around to the Chassidim and saying, Ader Rebbe is a felsher. This Rebbe is a bluffer. Yen Rebbe, he never asked for change. He pushed it. Do you imagine being so smart and he couldn't understand the value of money? He never understood the value of money. He raised a lot of money, he spent a lot of money, but he never understood money. He didn't understand money. One of the stories of the Mitteler Rebbe, which is, it's pushed disturbing. There was a stack of bills in his table, a lot of money. And someone made a joke. That's false, it's counterfeit. So without hesitation, he took the money and threw it in the fire. And the guy said, I was just kidding, too late. He had no, imagine being so smart. The Mitteler was such a gun, and he was a Ish Elakim, he was a Ish Ruchni, et nish verstanden Geld. He Poshet did not understand. He didn't understand the between a $1 bill and a $5 bill and a $100 bill was all the same to him. It was paper. He couldn't appreciate money. It's just an illustration of the degree of his hafshata. You understand? The idach, that Hagel the Mitteler Rebbe, when he led the Chassidim, the Mitteler Rebbe worked very, very hard to help his Chassidim earn parnasa. Now tomorrow I'm going to have Seminary Aleph. And I'm going to continue this. If anybody wants the rest of it, you'll ask me for it.